While only a small number of RollerCoaster Tycoon scenarios are explicitly about how much revenue you can earn, in reality almost every scenario will require you to build a profitable theme park in order to beat your goal. Why? Well, if your target is guest count, without earning money to build more rides, you won't be able to beat the goal. The same with park value targets. You can't increase the value of your park if you haven't earned enough money to build new rides. In fact, it's only in scenarios where money is no object that you'll be able to play without worrying about profits. And let's remind ourselves of the title of the game, RollerCoaster Tycoon. Have you ever heard of a tycoon who cannot make money? The ways to earn money are quite apparent in the game. Build rides, charge entry fees and generate extra capital through food and drink sales, on-ride photo sections and souvenir stalls. But how can we maximise all of these areas? Today I'll run through some tips on maximising the money you do earn, and next week I'll look at ways we can keep costs down. Some of these tips you may already know, but some will probably be new, and others are my opinions on popular RollerCoaster Tycoon debates. First up, the park entry fee. In RollerCoaster Tycoon Classic, this way of charging guests is fairly limited. Few scenarios utilise it, with pay per ride the more common way RollerCoaster Tycoon peeps are charged. However, when you are working with a pay on entry park, you'll find your revenue is much more limited. Guests spend less on park entry than they would on ride fees during their time in the park. I did a full video on how to maximise revenue specifically in pay on entry parks, but of course naturally you need to encourage new guests to come to your park over the retention of current guests, while also maximising revenue you can earn from guests by charging for souvenirs, on-ride photo sections and food and drink. You'll also need to be careful with how you set your entry fee. Don't undercut yourself, but be careful not to charge a price too expensive that some guests will turn away at the gate. Check out my park entry fee video for more on this. Next, advertising. Again, I've got a video with full depth on this and other ways of attracting more guests, but in short, advertising always brings in more revenue than you'll spend on the campaign, unless you use free park entry vouchers or a really cheap park entry fee. If you're short of funds, look inside your park. Selling off pre-existing scenery can be a great way of boosting your bank balance, but avoid removing trees and plants and any other scenery which costs money to remove. It's especially useful to claw this money back in areas of the park you may not be using for rides, especially in large parks where you may not need to cover all of the ground. Just be aware of the impact on ride stats if you remove scenery surrounding your rides. Avoid excessive distances between rides, especially early in the scenario. As your game continues, it may be necessary to use every corner of the park, but early on, keep rides close to one another. If you have huge empty spaces and long paths between rides, you're just delaying how quickly guests can get to their next ride, which for you is the next time they'll give you money. Long paths will also tire your guests out, and we want to make sure they stay in the park and spend every penny they arrive with, rather than going home tired with £50 still in their pockets. Throughput is vital to maximising revenue on roller coasters. Long stations help give you more trains with more cars, and using block breaks can also be a great way of getting more guests on a ride if you don't have the space for a long station. If your coaster is pay per ride, the more guests you can get on board at once, the better. They spend money when they pass through the ride entrance, not when they are stood in the queue, so keep them ticking through your station as often and as quickly as possible. Having ride entrances at the front of the station will also help speed up the boarding process. Avoid food courts. Another chance here for me to plug an existing video of mine where I tackled the food court debate. But one thing for sure is, if your funds are limited, stick to the rules of supply and demand. Have just as many food and drink outlets as you need and spread them across the park so guests don't have to walk too far to find a bite to eat. This allows them to spend money on a burger and get back to riding coasters, and therefore spending money as quickly as possible. Then there is the food, drink and souvenir sale price. Of course, you should always charge the maximum amount guests are willing to pay without complaining the price is too high, which prompts them not to purchase at all. This will always be higher than the default price, but a number of factors affect what guests are willing to pay before complaining the price is too expensive. I covered it in more detail in my shops and stores video, and Dirklink has produced a great Reddit guide to this, which you'll find in the description of this video. For most food and drink, you can safely charge the base prices outlined by Dirklink and found within the game's code. For most items with a default price of £1 or more, you can typically adjust the sale price to a level which allows you at least £1 profit, but for cheaper items that's not always the case. And other factors also play their part. Happier guests will pay a higher price than unhappy guests, and the weather is important too. You can charge more for hot food and hot drinks in cold weather. If the weather is hot, you'll be able to charge more for cold drinks and cold food. But if it's a cold part and you want to sell ice cream, well, most guests won't part with cash for that, just like in real life. Check out my shops and stalls video for more on this. Then there is the umbrella cheat, which allows you to charge a premium for umbrellas in wet parks. Guests will happily pay around £20 for an umbrella when it's raining. When the rain stops, they'll complain the price is too high. But if it rains often, the amount you generate from umbrellas in the wet weather far outweighs the negative impact of guests complaining about the price when it's dry. Souvenir stall placement. Make sure you use every souvenir stall available to you. Guests only buy one type of each souvenir, so don't go crazy in smaller parks with lots of hats or t-shirt stalls for example, but always use every different type of souvenir stall available to you. Place them around areas with popular rides, as happy guests will be more likely to buy a souvenir and more likely to pay a premium price for one. Toilets. Many players don't like to charge for toilets, but they do have a £49 per hour running cost. Depending how badly they need to use the toilet, guests won't complain about paying between 10 and 60 pence or cents for them. For most players, 20 pence or 20 cents is a reasonable compromise to cover running costs, though for me I usually settle at 10 pence, which will upset 0 guests. It's a small compromise and won't make a huge amount of difference, but if you can earn back the running costs of your toilets, then it will make a small difference to your profits, and a difference you'll notice even more when finances are tight, such as in pay-to-enter parks. Ride entry fees have huge importance. Shotty Steve's ride price calculator can help you figure out the best price to charge for rides in order to make the most money from them. Another tactic players use is to round up the excitement rating to the nearest whole number. So a ride with 6.53 excitement rating would have a £7 entry fee. Ride fee revenue is the biggest income generator in the game, so don't miss out on maximum profits by underselling your rides. On-ride photo sections are a great way of earning a little more profit from your popular coasters. They are common in theme parks across the world because of their high markup and ability to upsell guests who have already paid either a ride fee or a park entry fee. In pay-to-enter parks, I always try and build coasters which have the on-ride photo section available. And if I ever build a ride which allows the on-ride photo section, I absolutely include it. You'll find it on lots of roller coasters and the log flume and river rapids too. Whether a guest buys an on-ride photo or not is influenced by the game mechanics, and after that, if they are willing to pay the price you're charging is influenced by 2 factors, their happiness and the cost. The lower the cost and the happier the guest, the more likely they are to purchase the on-ride photo. If you charge £3, every guest who wants to buy a photo will be content with the price. Charge above £6 and even guests who would like to purchase the photo wouldn't buy it at that price. If you're comfortable that your guests are generally going to be coming off the ride very happy, then you can charge £3.30 and not lose out on any sales. Make sure queue lines are long enough, but not too long. You want there to be enough guests queuing so that trains entering the station can quickly reload and depart, but equally you don't want too many guests in your queue, and there are 2 reasons for this. 1. guests will be frustrated waiting and begin to lose happiness. And 2, while they are queuing, they can't spend any of their money. So if the queue is long enough, you're better off having a guest ride something else and return to that attraction later on. Finally, replace static rides every 2 to 3 years. You'll find that as static rides age, guests will start to find them too expensive. So, whereas guests might say £1.50 is really good value for a merry-go-round when it's just opened, later in the game they'll refuse to pay that price. You could lower the entry fee and earn less revenue, or simply delete the ride, replace it with something identical, and guests will treat it like a brand new ride and therefore be willing to pay a higher fee. This applies across all static rides, so things like the Ferris wheel, haunted house, 3D cinema and motion simulator should be replaced every couple of years. And those are my tips on maximising your revenue in RollerCoaster Tycoon Classic. Hopefully you found these tips helpful and they will give you something to consider next time you play RollerCoaster Tycoon Classic. Next week I'll look at ways we can cut costs, which, combined with maximising revenue, will help ensure maximum profits in every type of scenario.